歡迎各位嚟到家國生活，每逢晚上11點至12點喺 FM105.9 廣播直播室，我哋有3位 guest 包括 Foundation of Commemorate the Chinese Rail Worker Landy Anderson 佢係個 President or Chair 仲有 Bin Chow 係 Director of 個 Association， 仲有一位喺Alberta Calgary 嘅朋友Patrick Zhang， 仲有我哋節目主持 Josephine Pao。Josephine Pao, how do we start today?
First of all, I'd like to welcome all our special guests and wish our guests and everyone a happy Canada's Day. Now, before we getting into the discussion, about, how special today meant for the Chinese community and also the Indigenous community, we would like to ask Landy to start with, leading us to a moment of silence to commemorate the Chinese railroad workers and the children lost in the residential schools.
Thank you, Josephine. Hello, everyone. I'm Landy Anderson, and I'm the chair of the Foundation to commemorate the Chinese railroad workers in Canada. I'm mixed heritage, Métis and Chinese. My Chinese name is Ngok Mei, that means beautiful jade, and my Indigenous spirit name is Boshwana Dawa Haigin. And that means that I bring the drum or I bring balance. And before we have our moment of silence, I really do want to address the elephant in the room, which is that today's Canada Day is overshadowed by the recent discovery of close to 1,000 little innocent lives that were lost and that were murdered during the residential school era, and that those little innocent children across Canada in Manitoba, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan were members of the Indigenous community, and they attended residential school. So whether they were murdered or whether they died from disease, it's caused a very traumatic response for all Canadians. And some Canadians in Canada today are calling, and some Indigenous people are calling for the cancellation of Canada Day because of these atrocities. Where this dark shadow has been cast upon us on Canada Day, it gives us at the Foundation to commemorate the Chinese railroad workers in Canada. We use this day, July 1st, Canada Day, to raise awareness and to bring education to all Canadians on the Chinese contribution to the building of our national railway system, which united Canada politically and economically, thought to be actually the day that we built our nation. Quite often when the railroad was finished, people refer to it as a nation building day. So that said, we use this day to raise awareness so that we can prevent these types of atrocities from happening again, from the 4,000 Chinese lives that were lost in very hazardous and dangerous conditions, labor conditions, and poor working conditions, and the rugged, I don't need to talk around how rugged and raw Canada was in and around the time that the railway system was built. And because those lives were lost, those 4,000 lives were lost unnecessarily, and because these close to 1,000 children that attended residential school, Canada's dark history, we're using today, and this radio show, thank you to the hosts, to Josephine and to Alec, and to the other guests, Patrick and Bin, for being here today to remind all Canadians and our Chinese community of the importance of our Canadian values, and hearing about this ugly past, and making every effort within our power to prevent these types of things from happening again. And so now, as I understand, we're going to have a moment of silence in honor of those lost lives. Thank you.
Thank you. So Landy 咧就正話咧就做咗一個嘅 moment of silence，最主要咧就係因為今日嘅加拿大日，咁我哋咧就係即係喺過去呢個月，大家知道咧就大約有1000個印第安或者原住民嘅細路仔咧，就喺嗰個寄宿嘅學校嗰度咧就係即係有個 grave 嗰度發現咗，咁大家都好沉痛，咁at the same time 咧就即係加拿大日，我哋即係華人社區咧就即係佢尤其是 Foundation of Commemorating the Chinese Railway Worker 咧，佢哋咧就借呢個日子咧，就想 remind 所有加拿大人，其實咧就有4000名嘅中國嘅 worker， 個 railway worker 咧就係建造呢個加拿大嘅鐵路嗰陣時係身亡咗，咁我哋借呢個機會 commemorate 佢哋，咁大致上就係咁。Josephine，你繼續。
Alex，而家咧我想請你啦。Alex, may I invite you to acknowledge the land where we are meeting on?
Yeah, thank you. Josephine， 佢哋就Josephine 今日做咗 land acknowledgement， 所以佢俾個機會我哋做一個 land acknowledgement。咁通常我哋就做印第包括原住民或者 Canada Day 嗰啲重要儀式，我哋都做一個 land acknowledgement。Today we begin by acknowledging that we walk upon or we meet upon the traditional territory of Indigenous people, and we recognize their histories, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land. We are grateful to all Indigenous groups for their commitment to protect the land and its resources, and we are committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Now I would like to, ask everybody's opinion about Canada Day. What happened is after the discovery of all the bodies, of the children lost in the residential school, there are a lot of different opinions all over the internet and in the media. In fact, some of the city today, last minute, canceled their celebration, like City of Mississauga. I just really got the notice this morning. Now, Canada has been a country of 153 years already, and we're getting into 154 years. Now, I would like to ask everybody, how do you see that? Should we keep on celebrating Canada's Day each year as usual, or do we have another way? So maybe I start with Ben.
Hi. Yeah. I think we should continue to celebrate Canada Day. However, we have also to remind everybody that this day is celebrate our multiculturalism and also the celebration of the Canadian value, which is supposed to be very, shall I say, very tolerant, with very high tolerance level of different cultures. So we should celebrate that. However, we should also remind everybody that there's some ugly history in the Canadian history that we should educate the future generation, make sure it won't happen again. And it says easier than done. For example, I think this type of behavior has to do with cultures, has to do with their religions. So if we really want to change it, we got to start it from ground up. It's a lot of work needs to be done by the Canadian society.
Thank you, Ben. Alex.
邊方才講咧就話即係其實我哋加拿大個 history 咧就有好多即係黑暗嘅嘢，咁但係咧就即係我哋咧就要 celebrate in the sense 我哋要remember 呢啲咁嘅嘢嘅 back history and then we move forward. So Josephine, what's your question again?
Well, and it's really just ask everybody's opinion about Canada's Day because we all see it differently, right? Today, some of the celebrations canceled because of the commemoration of, the death of the children. But Canada is also a country of getting into 154 years, right?
Yeah.
So are there any values remaining that we should celebrate? I'm sure, there should be some, but, I respect everybody's different opinion, right?
Okay, so in light of the audience are all English speaking, I'll respond in English, right? As you all understood, Canada is a multicultural, diverse country, right? So up to the 80s, so we still call it Dominion. But since then, with the multiculturalism, the bilingual, and a lot of change implemented by the ex Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, so we now call it Canada Day instead of Dominion Day. As you notice, Dominion is a sort of Anglo-Saxon background, right? So it's just one step, at a time. So when the United Nations do the Declaration of the Indigenous Right, so 4 countries, including US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, do not agree with it. So with the hundreds, other countries do agree with it. But eventually we do agree with it. With the 2008, we agreed it, and then Harper apologized. So that's an ongoing, step. So at the time there was private bill, but it did not happen because, like, when we come to the land, a lot of business interests come in place. It wasn't done at the time. So now we come to witness the C-15 was passed last week. So which is called recognizing the United Nations Declaration Right for Indigenous People. So we can talk about it a little bit more. So this will open up a very important issue. Like, for example, the indigenous work was never in any legislation. Now it is. So before we call it Aboriginal, now we can call it Indigenous. So it's a step forward. At the same time, so there's one of the things that still have to clear it off is the freer, prior, consented, informed. So this is more or less like a veto in any project in Canada. If you're going to have a project involve the Indigenous people, so in a way they have a veto. So that's what they're proposing. But opposition, conservative, is still sort of struggling. So there will still be ongoing debate for about 2 years before we come to consensus. But by and large, we are the first country in the world to acknowledge this and to recognize that we have a truth, we have some bad past, and we will move forward. So in that regard, I think there's very good value to celebrate. So not to mention, Canada, in the past did something bad to the Indigenous people and to Chinese and to many others, Japanese, even Jews, etc. So, but past is past. We must recognize those things, and we have to know those truths, and we have to celebrate to always remember all this truth, and then we move forward. So I think that's my whole argument. Josephine Powell 問我話，其實即係近年咧就發現咗加拿大其實過去做咗好多啲即係 dark history，咁我哋應唔應該 celebrate 加拿大嘅日？咁個答案係肯定嘅，因為嗰啲係全部都係過去歷史嘅，係當時情況發生嘅。咁但係即係我哋我哋國家亦都好盡咗好多努力，譬如 United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Right 啦，我哋喺2008年嗰陣時 recognize 咗，咁當時想 pass 個 bill，但係咧就係因為 private bill 冇乜力，而且好多反對，咁啊到上個禮拜個 bill 25咧就 pass 咗，咁啊原住民咧其實咧好多權益可以開始咧就即係得到，亦都可能喺以前做嗰啲壞嘅嘢咧可以 redress 到，咁所以我哋其實咧要繼續 celebrate 呢個 Canada Day， 咁然之後我哋必須咧就將呢個 truth 咧就 remind 所有 Canadian 嘅人 on the Canada Day 呢樣嘢我哋發生咗，我哋以前係做咗啲咁嘅嘢，我哋要 acknowledge， 而且我哋要 move on。Josephine, you are in mail.
Because my husband was around. Patrick, you are the youngest on this group. I would like to, ask you, how do you feel about Canada Day? How long you been here in this country? Were you born here?
No, so I think I came to Canada when I was 8 years old. So, you know, I've lived in Edmonton, I lived in Yellowknife and Calgary. But if you wanted to ask me how I feel about Canada Day, so I really have mixed feelings. I don't like the concept here. I feel like we've been painting ourselves into a room where you decide you either want to celebrate Canada Day or cancel it. Because I think that when we say cancel, we're just talking, it's just another form of slacktivism. Like we're just saying that we're going to make things better by not doing something. And we talk about a lot of these issues as if they're just things that have happened in the past, but really they're things that are occurring right now with all the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and you know whatever is happening with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Like, because you know what, Canada is the first, like we also forget, which been mentioned about our multicultural nature, but Canada's, like, I believe they're the first country in the world to officially adopt multiculturalism as an official policy. So because of that, Canada has different meanings to everybody. That's why they say we're a mosaic, we're not a melting pot like our neighbors down south, right? So of course, like when you ask me like about Canada, it's a place where my family came and was able to build like a life for themselves and for my family today that I have to be appreciative of. But then of course we also have to still acknowledge that us being able to do that is also because other people lost their homes and their land. So, you know, if you ask me if I want to cancel it, I would say I wouldn't cancel it, because then that just means you're not doing anything. I'd rather celebrate, but maybe not in the happy way, but in the way that says, okay, you know what, I want to learn about the railroad workers, who, you know, the July 1st Exclusion Act 1923. I want to learn about what's happening with Indigenous relations right now, and I want to take action on it. Like that's what we should be talking about, not just polarizing ourselves with those who support Canada Day and those who don't. That's not a question that, it's not a real question. We've just painted ourselves that.
Thank
So
you, Patrick.
I'm really glad, you know, we have young people. You're not the only one that's saying that. In fact, you know, one of our colleagues, you know, Edward is saying the same thing. Right? So I'm glad we have very good hope for our future generation. 咁啊 Patrick 咧就方才咧就係即係個答案咧就話，佢話我唔會 cancel 呢個 Canada Day。咁因為咧就即係其實即係你 cancel 咧就意思話咧我就唔理嗰樣嘢，唔理嗰樣嘢，唔 acknowledge 嗰樣嘢。咁其實即係冇乜表示嘅啫喎，其實即係我會咧就係即係正面咁即係會 celebrate，但係 celebrate 我係唔開心，我會 remind 自己其實過去咧就有啲咁嘅沉痛嘅嘢，亦都有其他嘅嘢事情繼續發生緊，好似啲原住民嘅女人不斷仍然係現咗，咁所以我哋係要即係用呢個日子咧就remember 呢樣嘢，記得呢樣嘢，咁你記得加拿大係第一個國家咧就係成立呢個 multiculturalism 嘅，咁我哋亦都係第一個國家咧，就係即係將個 law 擺咗係去 respect 呢個 United Nations Declaration of Indgenous Rights 嘅，咁所以其實我哋創造咗好多個第一次，咁所以然之後我個 family 咧就可以，我 parent 嘅 family 就可以 establish 喺加拿大，我亦都可以 establish 喺加拿大，咁呢個係一個我哋應該 celebrate 嘅嘢。Josephine 繼續啊。
Okay, now I know that Landy already expressed herself a little bit. So do you have more to talk about the Canada Day, how you feel it?
Thank you, Josephine, and thank you, for to Ben and Patrick and Alec for expressing your views. I agree with you. I think that what I would say about when and some Indigenous people understandably are calling for Canada Day to be canceled because it doesn't feel right to celebrate when these terrible and atrocious behavior on part of Canadians takes place. On the one hand, it's a somber moment, and on the other hand, your people are celebrating with fireworks. So there's a bit of a disconnect between those two. But I think that I agree with the speakers, but it's not just about celebration, it's also about commemoration. And those two words need to be synonymous. And so July 1st has always had a very ugly, had ugly overtones for the Chinese community, who are the close to a very significant immigrant population here in Canada. And in fact, the Chinese people make up, I believe, close to half, about a little over 40% of the Asian immigrants. And so that said, when we were brought over by our original Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, he made a decision to build the railway with Chinese labor. And that was cheap labor. And we were recruited from my province in Toisan, where my family hails from, the Chinese side of my family. And we were recruited to come over and to construct the railway in extremely dangerous conditions in, between 1881 and 1884, 1885, when it was completed. And if you think of manual labor back in the late 1800s, in the absence of any modern day machinery, what that was like. And for Chinese people to come over here and not be prepared for the weather, and to not be prepared, properly treated, to be subjected to oppressive, to outright oppression and racist paradigms, and yet to overcome that and to stay and want to come to Canada for a better life for themselves, and for Canada to exclude them. Not only to exclude them with the Chinese Immigration Act, but to exclude them on Dominion Day, what we now, as Alec was saying, we now know as Canada Day. July 1st, 1923, Patrick mentioned that. And the Chinese community could just I don't want to say equally because, but they could rightfully call for the cancellation. And instead, our foundation uses Canada Day every day. You can set your clock by our memorial wreath laying ceremony on July 1st every year at 10:30 since our monument was erected in 1989. So do the math on that. For over 40 years, we've come together to honor the Chinese lives that were lost and to raise awareness about Canada's history, so that we know better, we could do better. And Canada is a beautiful country because we do apologize. We say sorry. We take responsibility for our actions, and we do move forward. In Alec's opening remarks, he talked about moving forward, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to come today to raise awareness to these issues, and to because there's a lot, it's stirred up a lot of really ugly feelings and emotions, and Canada is grieving across the country for the little lives that were lost, those 100 little angels that were subjected to torturous conditions. It's very painful to think about that. And so it doesn't feel right to be celebrating with our family at the same time when we're grieving and mourning and in despair over some of the atrocities in our Canadian history. But we are going to take, Canada will take responsibility for that. And we do need to move forward. And that's part of our healing in terms of we need to be able to heal our wounds properly. And Canada Day comes with a mixture of emotions. And now it's the added complications of what's happening now. On top of our ugly history with the way Chinese people were treated, with the Exclusion Act and then the head tax. First, it started with the head tax, and then the Exclusion Act, which has greater implications for Chinese families, because what happened with that is you created a bachelor society, and by creating a bachelor society and not allowing our men who all came over to make a better life for themselves, women and children were left behind in Canada, and fathers grew up, children grew up without fathers. So I think that, we'll hear more of that later, but thank you for asking, Josephine.
Josephine 問Landy 咧，就佢即係有啲咩補充咁啊？Landy 咧就補充就話其實咧就我哋唔應該 cancel 個 culture， 我哋應該 move forward。咁其實喺即係我哋用呢個Canada Day 咧，由1989年開始咧就係即係將嗰個人頭稅同埋個 Chinese exclusion 咧就係 bring it back。因為我哋咧就即係有好多嘅即係中國人咧喺歷史上面咧就幫咗加拿大起咗鐵路，然之後就俾佢哋遺棄咗。咁佢哋就 create 咗一紮咧就所謂嘅 bachelor， 即係 ECR， 佢哋留咗喺度做佢嚟咗做嘢之後就唔準佢哋啲家人過嚟。Alright， 唔准家人過嚟變咗好多 bachelor， 咁其實呢樣嘢就即係好唔啱嘅，係一個 dark history。我哋可以借呢一日咧，就係即係希望大家喺沉痛嘅情況之下，亦都可以咧就remember 呢啲咁嘅 dark history， 然之後我哋可以 move forward 嚇。So sounds like in terms of truth reconciliation, we should talk about truth, healing, and reconciliation. Josephine,
so I'm going to express myself too. After a year of pandemic and Black Lives Matter, followed by waves of anti-Asian hate, we actually were supposed to be into a mood for celebration when July 1st comes, right? But unfortunately, we lately were overshadowed by the residential schools. And I actually agree with Landy, and I heard from Elizabeth Dodd as well. July 1st is not really a day for every ethnic group to proudly celebrate Canada because of dark history of Canada, right? So that's why we can move forward if we know that there's a dark chapter. We recognize the problems, we reflect. And then, is really know the problem exists and without amending it? No. We should really, like Alec mentioned, truth. The Indigenous community, they want the truth. How many people were really missing, like in reality, missing, without a justified cause? And instead of pointing finger to each other, the government and the Catholic Church should be really accountable and do their, and take up their responsibility. I think Canada Day from now on has a special meaning to me. I celebrate the multiculturalism in Canada. Very special. We are the #1 best, most comfortable country, best country in the world for a few years in a row. We should keep our strength. But whatever we have done wrong, it's time to right the wrongs.
Josephine， 你可唔可以自己做 translation 啊？
好啊。咁咧我就話咧，加拿大係一個國家咧，係值得慶祝嘅。雖然過去咗，尤其是過去咗1年咧，我哋係有成個世紀內最嚴峻嘅疫情，跟住亦有呢個黑人運動啦，跟住咧亦都係有針對性嘅對亞裔移民啊，對Muslim 啊咁多嘅種族問題啊。係浮面咗，因為呢個疫情。咁我哋呢個時候咧，其實本來咧就係應該好開心咁慶祝7月1號嘅，但好可惜咧，因為我哋原住民嘅寄宿學校嘅細路仔個屍首咧，就啱係掘到，咁令我哋都喺陰影之下。我好明白今年我哋唔係真係好笑係咁，或者去揸住國旗去揮啊咁樣即係去慶祝。但係唔好唔記得，我哋呢個加拿大係一個各個族裔多元文化嘅國家，係一個好特別，全世界好特別嘅國家。同埋我哋咁多年都係 #1 in the world 嘅，咁好多移民嚟，咁我哋係有我哋自己嘅 success。要前進，我哋一定要承認我哋自己嘅歷史錯誤。除咗回首之外咧，我哋應該係點樣補救咧？點樣向前咧？大家係咪所有嘅族裔應該係手牽手咁前進咧？呢個就係我嘅諗法。多謝。
So it's about time for the intermission. So we take a break. 廣告之後轉頭翻嚟，唔該晒。 歡迎各位又嚟到家國生活，每逢晚上11點至12點喺 FM105.9 廣播直播室，依然有我哋3位嘉賓，亦都有 Josephine Pao。Josephine Pao， 我哋就係講到邊度咧？
Well, last time we all expressed, last session we all expressed ourselves very well about how we feel about Canada's Day. The consensus we should continue, right? And we have to move forward, but we continue and make this country better, a better place for everybody who take it as home. Bin?
Yes.
Hi. I would like you to share with us, the story from your family. I know that you have been here, your family has been here for a few generations, right? Starting, so your grandpa?
Yes.
Yeah. So can you share with us, your family story and how do you feel about it?
Yes. Okay, initially, we have a rather dim view about the Canadian system. Like my grandfather, he came over, worked in the railroad, and then after the railroad was built, and then they started the head tax. Now, my grandfather, he had a hard time to pay for the trip to come over. In those days, it was about $8 or $10 of the boat fare to come from China to Vancouver. And then he got a job, he worked on the railroad. When the railroad was built, and he's under tremendous pressure because there's rumors due to linguistic barrier in those days. It's something bad is going to happen to the Chinese community, but didn't know exactly what. And that later turned out to be the head tax. And because of the head tax, they have to pay, otherwise they have to go back to China. And ended up, he have to borrow money from the Lee's Association because my grandfather's last name is Lee. So he borrowed money from there and borrowed some money from the people who come from the similar region in China, so that he got raised about $50 and some of his own saving to pay for the head tax. And they thought after paying the head tax and become like anybody else in Canada, but it's not. My grandmother cannot come over. And because of this racist policy, my grandmother ended up never have more than 3 or 4 years with my grandfather. Because every so many years, my grandfather went back to China for several months and then come back. Because in those days, people worked about $1 a day, the Chinese people, because their wage is lower than the white people. And they save up quite a bit for a long time, for years, before he can go back to China for a trip. And with that, it went on for a long time. It was until 1957. My father now want to apply to come to Canada because my grandfather is getting old. He's by himself here. And because of, at the time, was the conservative government in power, Stephen Biko was in power, and we were not allowed to come. There's no reason given why. They just not processing our application. And then it just sit there until 1963, when the Liberal government got under power on November. And then they processed our application because we were qualified as immigrants. Because my father speaks fluent French. And financial wise, we were in an acceptable level at the time for the immigrations. So when the Liberal government took power on November, our family we landed in Vancouver on the last day of March of 1965, only about 3 or 4 months. But when the government don't want you to come over, they can sit on there for years and years. So yes, we were happy be able to come here to meet my grandfathers and all that. But I often ask myself, why? Why the Chinese always get to be on the bad end of the stick? And this is why I have a dim view about Canada until our peer Elliott Trudeau become the Prime Minister, and he introduced multiculturalism, which is really lift the psychological burden from my shoulder. And unfortunately, lately, again, there's some politician, they try to demonize China. And no matter what you do, it's not right. If the Chinese technological advance, they say, no, that would jeopardize our security, national security. If the Chinese, I mean, their cotton production was better and the quality is better, they come up with the Chinese genocide of the Muslims and all that. And again, this caused another wave of anti-Chinese sentiment in the Canadian society, or even worse, in the state. But this politician, they're not being responsible. There's no truth. There's no proof of it. Just speculation. And this is what caused making Canadian society having very heavy racism against one group or the other, because they're irresponsible politicians. And if we learn from the past, the pain that a lot of our Canadian brothers and sisters suffering, we should start with electing responsible politicians to go into holding government offices. And this is the starting to eliminate this use speculation to target certain group in our society. I think Canada Day, we should use this to learn from this so that to make our society more humane society in the world. And we can become once again like the multiculturalism policy, that we become the leader of the society of the world. And yet we are not able to do that. Our politician is keeping our country as a follower. And this is how I feel about Canada. I think Canada, the Canadian politician should be working for Canada instead working for some other countries.
Thank you.
Okay, so 阿邊即係講呢個人頭稅對佢嘅意義係點樣樣？咁就其實咧就佢阿爺咧就係即係好早年過咗嚟，咁就亦都係 contribute 咗喺個 Canadian 嘅 history 嗰度嘅。咁但係咧即係人頭稅一出嚟嗰陣時咧，佢冇錢，咁所以佢係姓李嘅。咁所以佢要去理事同鄉會嗰度借錢，同埋即係用即係喺個即係佢自己原居地嗰度咧，就係借咗好多錢，借咗50蚊，咁啊諗住咧就可以咧就留喺加拿大，咁啊就以為咧就同其他人一樣，其實就唔係嘅，佢又唔可以即係帶啲親人過嚟咁樣樣，咁結果咧就係即係佢哋要 work 好 hard 啦咁樣樣，咁直至到咧就係1957年。咁佢咧就係即係申請嚟佢爸爸申請嚟加拿大，但係咧因為咧係保守黨嘅 Stephen Baker 嗰陣時咧就做 Prime Minister， 咁結果咧就過唔到，直至到 Pierre Trudeau 1963年咧就即係做咗執政之後，咁佢呢個 file 先至開始，咁一直 process 直至到1965年咧就可以全家都過嚟，咁所以咧就係佢哋高呼咗一個好沉痛嘅歷史嚇。 第一次場咁啊，做出邊。
Yeah, I actually have the same experience, like with the families living around me when I was a child in Hong Kong. I live very close with a lot of Taishanese, Taishanyan.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, their fathers are all, working in either San Francisco, America, or Canada, right?
Yes.
So bad that, they come home every almost 10 years to stay home for a few months. And then, they have a child and they go back. And then, the mothers just nurse the child, throughout all this year, and they don't get reunited. And then the boys got older, and then, the boy joined the father. So the mother was very difficult because of this exclusion act. They can't join the husband. She lived like a life widow. So I really have my heart with those people, and usually this type of housewife, they save so much. Every day I saw that what they ate is only really bean sprout, salt fish, tofu. Very, very hardworking women, Taiwanese. Okay. Now, before I ask Landy about the legal process involved getting their head tax redress, Patrick, as an accountant, can you give us, what does it mean, the head tax, in today's, dollar value?
So like a value adjusted for inflation.
Yeah, the context of
today.
head tax, yeah, in today's, value and,
It's a prompt question, bro, sister.
Well, so just by Alec, okay, the
No,
context.
no. You, if you have it, can you let us know? I can't remember. I come.
Okay, I actually know it, and I know it, but I will leave it to.
So it's a quiz.
Don't worry
Come
about
on,
it. Don't worry about it. It's 2 years' salary.
Okay.
The cost of 2 houses.
So 2 years salary of you or me? My salary is very low.
That was in 1903, right?
At that point, yeah.
我明你意思，即係其實即係50蚊就係2年嘅 salary， yeah， 明白。
Right. And the head tax kept on raising, right? So, you know what? I'm so sorry about putting you on the spot. Maybe I misunderstood Alec a little bit. My apology to my young guest, Patrick. But so I would just really turn to Landy, to give us, how was the fight?
No,
with the government?
just before I suggest, like maybe let Patrick talk about his vision about head tax being a young Canadian.
Okay, why don't we let Candy, Landy,
Patrick,
and then
Candy.
go back to Patrick, okay? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So
Candy, chair.
Yeah, it was very fascinating to hear Bin's firsthand account, because, in Calgary, where I guess we're a little bit later in terms of immigration wave, so we don't have as many like super multi-generational Chinese Canadians. But how I learned about this was actually not even through school, because our education system is so poor that it doesn't cover that in any significant way. The way I learned about it was through my work in Chinatown, which I know we can discuss like at length in another day. But what it kind of showed me in like talking to people like Bin was, the problem that we're facing these days, like with all sorts of racism, is that you can be othered based on how you look. And what learning about head tax, what it meant for me, and because I have 2 kids, like I want my daughter to feel like, when she grows up one day, like, hey, Chinese people have been in Canada since the start, since the 1800s, and you don't learn that in school. You don't feel that from the media, and that's the importance of head tax redress. And just as importantly, it's also the importance of making sure our education systems can feel that. And because what I tell everybody when we do these Chinatown tours is that there's no way we can understand what Canada is and where Canada is going if we don't have a good understanding of where we came from. What are the contributions of every ethnic group, and not just the ones that, you know, our poor education system has picked up on. So, I mean, that's sort of my feeling. Like, I'm an immigrant, I understand that. So I will not feel as bad as somebody like, for example, my daughter who's growing up Canadian, for one day for somebody to tell her that, hey, you're not Canadian, you know, like you don't, it's essentially the same thing as taking someone away from their home. It's taking away someone's home, and similar to what Ben was saying about creating a bachelor society, like it's the same thing, like residential school, like of course it's in different ways. You're removing children from their families. Here you're removing fathers from their families, although, you know, for different stories, different contexts, but the separation of families has always caused a lot of grief and heartache, like all throughout the world. It doesn't matter who you are, what your race is. But thank you for that question.
Patrick 咧就話即係佢對於人頭稅呢個諗法咧，就因為佢自己係中國人，即係有呢個歐陸，咁所以咧就即係好多時咧就係因為呢個問題咧，就令到好多人咧就係即係覺得佢唔係 Canadian 咁樣。咁你要記得咧，就喺學校裏邊咧，就佢冇講到即係呢個 Chinese 喺加拿大嘅歷史，尤其是即係我哋個國家。其實我哋中國人咧就喺加拿大咧立國嗰陣時已經好多 contribution， 但係呢樣嘢未 recognize。咁我希望佢咧就話即係呼啲人頭稅呢個事情同埋其他嘅嘢咧，就令到咧就係即係佢個細路將來佢哋長大，即係佢哋知道呢一番歷史，將來知道長大，即係冇人可以叫佢哋話你哋唔係 Canadian 嗰啲咁嘢。咁佢係希望咧就係達到呢一樣嘢嚇，咁啊將呢個歷史咧就擺放咗喺我哋個教育嗰度嚇。
Yeah, there's a big outcry there, outcry there to educate, like the citizens and the children about Canada. Like we cannot really hide, our history from the kids in the textbook, right? We must be honest. If we don't, if we are not honest, we are not really in sync as a nation. So I know that, the Bachelor Society, because, so vibrant in the Chinatown, and there are a lot of neighborhood association, like village association, 李氏中親會, right? 李氏中親會, yeah, 龍江會, 好多, so many Chinese organization is really to bind the people together, because they don't have families. That's the way to overcome isolation at that time and helping each other out. I think we Chinese are smart. We kind of like know how to draw the power from association, right?
最其實我想問阿邊，其實我喺 WhatsApp 同佢經常有傾偈嘅，有交流嘅。咁我哋未必同樣意見，但係即係好多時都有交流，係好 respectful。阿邊其實你阿爺係姓李，但係你姓周，其實嗰個故事係點樣？
嗰個唔係我阿爺，嗰個係我外公。哦，外公 ，OK， 明白。而家係我外公，但係英文咧 grandfather。
哦，係啊，冇錯。咁其實即係當時你嚟嗰陣時咧，即係嗰陣時63年係咪？咁即係64年3月31號。其實當時咧，即係你哋嚟嗰陣時咧，係咪依然有好多種族歧視嘅？
嗱，我本人就唔見到有，因為點解咧？我個人嘅性質咧，同人哋唔同嘅，因為咧，我係。即係如果你對我唔公道嘅時候咧，我唔理你係乜嘢人 ，OK？ 我以同樣嘅方法對翻你，咁樣咧，人哋咧見到我啲咁嘅態度咧係唔敢㗎。但係如果咧，好似我有個同學 ，OK， 有個香港同學，佢好靜嘅，咁樣咧就佢成日都俾啲同學蝦㗎。
明白
，OK？所以咧，有時咧，我哋自己嘅態度啊係好緊要，同埋你唔好即係做到啲嘢，即係做到唔合規矩嘅嘢咯，等人哋唔尊敬你。但係你每一樣嘢，你做到好合規矩， 但係如果人哋俾你麻煩咧，絕對唔能夠縮沙。
You stand
咁
up
嘅時
for
候
yourself.
咧，你唔會有乜種族歧視㗎。
So actually, that was the conclusion that we drew last night in another program. So Bin was saying that, you know, like his character, you know, he will stand for himself, an eye for an eye, you know, but he would also be respectful to everyone, you know, do the same way, do the status quo. Yep. Come on, Josephine, sorry, 繼續啦嚇。
Okay, no more interruption. Landy.
Okay, I apologize.
I just, first of all, thank you for the time to share my experience with the Redress Express. But I'd like to just acknowledge that Bin really hit and promoted a really good point about our politicians, because the people that we vote into our political system are the ones that are actually creating these racist paradigms. They're the ones, the politicians, that created these racist laws and the Exclusion Act. That's why it is important that we ensure that our vote counts and that we use the political system for the greater good. So thank you for that, Ben. And then when Patrick talked about the disruption to families, whether it's through the head tax or the residential system, those traumatic experiences are very, very hard to overcome. So first of all, my grandfather, Ralph Lunkun Lee, was 106 years old at the time of our Prime Minister's apology. At that time, it was the Right Honorable Stephen Harper on June 22nd, 2006. And my grandfather came from the region of Toisan, Slum Phao, which is the area that he was from. And in 1881, when our Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, decided to use Chinese labor to build the railway system, recruitment was set up in Toisan. And those recruiters enticed the men to come over. And all of those men came over, 17,000 men came to build the railway. And it was on the heels of the BC gold rush, and it was Gold Mountain. And the Chinese were coming over, there's push and pull factors, so there was things going on in China that were pushing them out and things that were pulling them into Canada. But when Chinese people got here, the white people in the BC gold rush took the coveted spots, and the Chinese people and the Indigenous people panhandled gold side by side, and they had to panhandle the crappy spots, and they had to work harder. And that was the start of the relationship between Indigenous and Chinese people. And then that recruitment in Toisan, people kept coming to build the railway. And now it was, they were, at the end of the day, I think about over 80,000 paid the head tax. And the head tax started as $50, and that didn't stop the Chinese from coming. And it went up from $50 to $100, and from $100 finally to $500 in 1903. And that's what Josephine was trying to get at, is about the $500 in 1903. What's that equivalent to today? Because $500 in 1903, she quoted, was the equivalent of 2 salaries or 2 houses. And so that was the equivalent of $500 in 1903. And that was politically sanctioned to keep Chinese people out, and it didn't. And so that's why we ended up with the Exclusion Act. And the Exclusion Act wasn't repealed until the mid 40s, about 47, I believe. And that was women and children growing up in China without fathers and husbands. So then fast forward to my grandfather. He was born in 1900. He came over in 1912, literally on a slow boat from China. And everybody, the family, pitched in to pay the head tax so that he could make a better life for himself, because that was what people strive. We came to Canada to make a better life for ourselves. And the whole community came together to pay that head tax. And he in honor, and I don't know if it's commitment, but he sent money back to the village right up until the day he died. So for 90 years, 94 years, he sent money back. All of his money in Canada that he worked, he sent a portion back to the village, and the people in the village were able to benefit from his funding. And so anyways, I knew the people that were active in the redress campaign, and I just watched the documentary, and there are some big names. You know, Olivia Chow and Jack Layton for 25 years campaigned in terms of to try to get that redress. And Susan Ng was instrumental, and Bradley was instrumental in a media campaign, and Avi Go was instrumental in pushing the agenda forward. And those were only some of the names that I'm familiar with. There was a lot of politicians and community activists that came together. And there was a man that rode on a motorcycle. His name was Jim. And he actually started it because he got on his motorcycle, and I can't remember Jim's last name. Someone can help me.
Wong. His last name is Wong.
Jim Wong. He got on a
Yeah.
motorcycle to raise awareness for the head tax campaign, which I wasn't aware of. And he rode his motorcycle across Canada. And that's when 25 years, Jack Layton and Olivia Chow, they could not get any movement. People couldn't get themselves organized, but Jim started it. And then there was a media campaign behind Jim. Bradley got involved. There was a media campaign behind that. And the next thing you knew, it was a platform issue in the vote in 2006. And I was not aware of any of that. And my grandfather and I were eating lunch in a Chinese restaurant, and he was Nilong, which means he was hard of hearing. And I used to be fluent in Toisan, and we would be in the restaurant. I'd be yelling at him in Toisan because he couldn't hear, and so everyone could hear us. And the cooks, Toisan is a dying language, you know, because we were the first ones over here in Chinatown in Toronto, and that's all people spoke was Toisan. But you know, the dominant language takes over, and our Toisan, you know, is I don't want to say a small village, but villagers and farmers. But the cooks heard us speaking Toisan, and the cooks came over and said, your grandfather, this was right after Jim was riding his motorcycle across Canada. And the cooks came over and said, your grandfather, they heard us speaking Toisan. They said, he must be a head taxpayer. And I said, Grandpa, are you a head taxpayer? And my grandfather says, yeah, I paid the head tax. And I was shocked because I didn't know what the head tax was. The same way Patrick said, it wasn't taught in school. And Bin said our education system is failing our children because we're not reviewing this in Chinese history and the Chinese contribution to the building of the railroad. It's not being discussed in our classrooms the same way residential school isn't. So that's when I learned about the head tax. And I really was not very socially aware. I was just trying to raise my own kids and keep a roof over my head and look after my grandfather. And so when these Chinese cooks came out, and they said, I bet you your grandfather's, if he's Toisanese, he must have paid the head tax. And that's when I asked in public in a restaurant in Pickering, Ontario. And that's when I learned about that. And I said to myself, I have to help my grandfather get his redress. And that's when I spoke in public at a public hearing in 2006. And that's when I met the redress people. And they invited us to ride the Redress Express on the day of the apology. So on June 22nd, 2006, the day before, Susan Ng and the redress people, and I don't know all of the people involved, but they organized a train ride from BC all the way to Ottawa. And how fitting was that, that the Chinese people would ride a train for the apology on, to receive that apology. You know, my grandfather paid the head tax in 2000, and he paid the head tax at 12 years old in 1912. He was 106 years old on that day. And when we went to Toronto, Susan Ng thrust the last spike, a ceremonial last spike into his hands. And that's when he became a superstar. He became the poster boy for the redress. And he was on every front page of every national paper on that day. And that was the ceremonial spike from Pierre Burton. He actually had two spikes, and he gifted that one spike to the Chinese redress campaign. And he knew we'd do the right thing with it. And so my grandfather and my family carried that spike on its last journey to the to Ottawa. where it was presented to our Prime Minister for the apology. And it was presented to him in the same railway room, the room that our Prime Minister made the decision to build the railway. And I'm just going to pull this off the wall and show you. So this is the front page. There's Grandpa there. That's the front page of the Toronto Star. And he was actually on, the Google Doodle. So Google has a doodle every day, and they usually will put anything that's significant to that doodle. And on that day, the doodle was Grandpa and this picture. And so that picture was taken by Canadian Press. And so it's really unfortunate because I think about 81,000 people paid the head tax, yet only 6 living head taxpayers received that apology in the House of Commons on that day. And many of our head taxpayers actually died. And so before receiving that apology. So while, our family is celebrating that apology, it's with that mixed emotion. As much as there's happiness, there's sadness for all of the head taxpayers that did not live to see that apology. 94 years for my grandfather and other people. James Pon, the founder of the foundation to commemorate the Chinese railroad workers in Canada, he was 88 on that day. And he actually, he was an engineer, and he had the spike and he presented it. James actually started our foundation. And he and the community at that time, and I can't name all of the people that James and Vera Pon surrounded them to build our monument, which is at the foot of the Rogers Center here in Toronto in Chinatown, just around Spadina and Blue Jays Way. And every year, that monument, we come together and we lay wreaths. And again, 10:30 every year, you can just join us. We actually have a video, The Ties That Bind. It's a documentary. It's very well made. We use that with CHIRP money, the Canadian Heritage Fund. And James put that video together with the help of many people that, like myself, that told the oral history of their family and their relationship to Canada's political system and to the Exclusion Act and the head tax. So I'll stop there because I could just keep going and
I know that's your passion.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you did, but I think you have got Josephine and myself tearing a little bit. So I don't know how you did it, though. Somehow one of my eyes is tearing. Yeah. And I don't think it's allergy. Okay, so我做少少簡單翻譯咁Landy 咧就講咗個好長嘅 history， 咁就包括咧就話將初中國人點樣嚟加拿大咧就係掘金嘅，咁我哋其實咧掘金嗰陣時咧就都有好多人啊，好似唔記得咗好似係8000幾人，咁然之後咧就通常咧就 Indgenous 同埋中國人咧就係即係喺嗰啲掘金嘅地方咧就企埋一邊咧做 pen sticking， 即係接嗰啲貨嗰啲重要嗰啲位置咧都俾啲白人嘅，咁直到 John A. McDonald 1891年咧就佢話要開始咧就起鐵路嗰陣時咧就 recruit 更多嘅人過嚟咧，就係起呢個鐵路咁樣嚇。咁後來有人投訴由50蚊加到咧就係500蚊咁樣，咁結果有人反對，咁又整咗個 Exclusion Act 咧咁所以咧就做咗種好多嘢咧，就令到即係中國人咧就係受咗好多委屈嘅咁樣。咁然之後咧就喺Jack Layton、Olivia Chow 咧就係即係喺90年代咧就係積極處理呢個問題，亦都 Susan Ling 亦都有幫咁樣，咁咧亦都有個叫 Jim Wong 咧 Cross Canada 踩個 bike 咧就令到即係好多人知道咧就呢個人頭稅嗰件事。咁佢喺個 restaurant 嗰度咧就係即係見到即係有人問咧就係佢阿爺嗱你係講台山話嘅，你咪有人頭稅。咁喺嗰個 moment 咧阿 Landy 咧。從來喺學校冇聽過呢啲嘢嘅，直至到佢阿爺話俾佢聽話佢係收人頭稅，佢先至知道呢個咁嘅問題。咁所以Susan Ling 佢哋成班咧就係即係整咗，即係令到呢個 order 話咧，就喺呢個人頭稅嗰方面做 apology 咧。咁佢哋喺2006年咧喺 Vancouver 坐個 train 去 Toronto， 咁然之後咧就係接受呢個 apology 咁樣。咁而佢阿爺咧，亦都係當 Toronto Star 咧，就係個 front page 啦。咁 Doodle 咧就亦都係咧，即係將佢咧就係即係變咗個 story 啊。Doodle 係Google 裏邊一個好重要嘅 section， 亦都咧就係令到佢個爸爸佢個 grandfather 咧就係 become the top of the attention on that day。咁然之後有個叫另外一個88歲我唔記得佢叫咩名，就 form 咗個 foundation for 呢個commemorating the railway worker。咁然之後 at the time 咧我哋有個 monument 喺呢個Sky Dome 隔離嗰度喺 Blue Jay Avenue 好似嘛。咁然之後佢哋就每年咧就7月1號，咁10點半咧佢哋會喺度 celebrate。咁大致上係咁樣，我好多 figure 我唔記得咗啊。咁 which is a very good long story 咁樣。咁其實我哋時間都即係差唔多，不如俾其他兩位有啲嘢有冇補充啊 ？So for we are almost wrapping up, like for both Patrick and Bin, you guys have more things to add?
No? Okay. I just really want to add, that was really a long struggle to get the head tax redress and the apology from the Prime Minister. It went through so many governments, and two names I would really like to add, who were really also spearheading the movement. One is Dr. Joseph Wong. The other one is a lawyer, Chen Bingding, they help a lot, they did a lot of good things, right? So it's Canada made lots of money on the head tax. If you sum it up, I forgot the figure, it's a huge amount of money, but we have to move on, right? So Alec, I know that you have something to share with us about the Tamil community. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so this gentleman, Raj Subramanian, he's my buddy from Tamil community. So basically, like 1986 and 97 is the time that they had a really big trouble in Tamil. His parent, his mom, they were a sort of living in Jaffna. What they call it internally displaced person. And so 86 they were in the other city, so both city were sort of bombarded by the Indian army, like at the same time they just don't shooting and killing, but at the same time like causing many women die. He didn't explain the difficulty well, but basically those women were raped and then killed by the Indian. So what he was saying, even Sri Lanka did a lot of bad things. Indian even did the worst thing in the 86 and 87, trying to, like a sort of assimilate and remove the Tamil community. So his post also talked about, they came to Canada as a refugee. And since then, all the other friends, also from Tamil, they suffer the same problem like him in those days, and they came to Canada to reborn the living. So their Canadian value is like it's a place that they refuge, stay away from all those vigilant, and now they can come to a peaceful country to grow up, grow the family, and this is something that they appreciate. So I just want to say that even though they are Tamil is not part of the history, but they are the part that has been suffered with a similar problem in their home country, and they come to Canada to find a land that they can peacefully live the life. So I just want to share with everyone, so that I would definitely invite them to come to a show to talk about more.
Yeah.
咁就話最後呢個泰米爾人咧，其實86呢個 friend 咧就86年至87年咧，佢哋喺呢個原居地嗰陣時，俾啲印度嘅 army 咧，就佢哋個民族咧俾人shoot 啊，俾人啲女人俾人強姦啊，咁佢哋 run 個 life 咧就叫 internal displaced person， 即係話日日係咁走嘅，即係希望咧就即係周圍住啊，令到佢哋可以咧 有個 peaceful 嘅地方住，咁佢哋咧係用難民身份嚟加拿大嘅，咁然之後咧就喺加拿大咧就成長 so they are really very successful. This is actually a software developer and make very good money these days. So back to you, Josephine.
Well, I just really want to add on, there are a lot of injustice happen in the world every day. In India, especially, they have the caste system, the Dalits, right? They are almost treated like animals, people can beat them on the street anytime, take over the things. They almost live like beggars. And in Kashmir, the region where Pakistan and India fight, that area, have rapes so often, and the rapes happen so often that the police doesn't really pay attention that much, like sometimes they have to give up because, they can't handle that much. Or I don't know whether it's the case law or their unwillingness. So I feel that that's why we really have to be thankful in Canada, a place, where we can really peacefully and happily settle here. So thanks for everybody. Anything to add?
冇，就係想翻譯兩句啫。Josephine Powell 其實或者唔淨止即係正話佢聽到聽冇，其實世界上有好多唔公平嘅事咁樣。我哋希望咧就即係嗰啲難民可以令到佢哋加拿大咁就有得安居下。咁啊，今日差唔多啦，係嘛？
係啊。
Thank you very much for everybody. Happy
you.
Canada Day.
Yeah.
And nice to meet you, Bin, personally now. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye, Landy and Patrick. We have hope now, Patrick. So for the younger generation, so
we'll bring you back, Patrick, on other topics. And Landy, thank you very much. And Ben, you folks taught me a lot. Every time I listen to you, I got something more. I thought I am adequate, I'm not.
And thank you for making us tear, right? Okay.
Hey, Josephine, just a point for you to get the real reference. When you say how much head tax was paying, now for the head tax years, the Chinese in those states, they don't have Canadian citizenship. They pay $23 million of head tax, and it only takes $25 million to build a CPR from coast to coast.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
So that will give you some idea.
So we actually pay for the railway.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's very good.
I will put that
in. It's a really good statement to wrap up our show. Thank you, Ben.
That's important. Bye-bye.